Welcome back to Pathfinders, guys. It's great to see you. My name's Dave, your friendly neighborhood Bible teacher. I'll wait for my grandmother. Hello, how are you guys? Come in. And today we are going to be in week 3 of our King David series, part 1. And what I mean by that is that King David is such a big deal in the Old Testament, and in fact for the whole narrative of the Bible, that I felt that he needed 2 parts. And so we're going to, the month of March, we're going to be covering part 1, and then in May we'll do part 2. And part 1, of which we're in week 3 of 4, covers King David from his childhood to his taking the throne, or his coronation as king of Israel. So his early years, basically. And then part 2 in May will cover his reign as king of Israel. And today we're going to be with David kind of at his one of his lowest points, physically speaking, but also I think one of his highest points spiritually. This is really where David, I think, embodies what it means to have the heart of God. And when we think of David, we think of a man with the heart of God. David is spiritually one of the people we can look up to the most. He wrote so many psalms praising God, being at one with God, bringing his problems to God, and really, I think, having a, like it says, he had a heart for God. And in these moments that we're about to read about in 1 Samuel 20, it says 24, 20, I think this should be really 22 through 26. I should have put that. This part of in this story shows him being completely dependent upon God and really being okay with that, and shows us a really good example. But at the same time, he's a human being, and he is not Jesus. Okay, David is kind of what we call a type for, he is the prototype for the Messiah. And he lays the foundation for our understanding of the Messiah. And he is a king of Israel, but he is not the king of kings, right? Jesus comes from Jesse's lineage, who is the father of David. Jesus comes from the line of David, but David is not the Messiah, obviously. He is not the perfect king. And because of that, we start in this part of our story, we start to see the cracks in the foundation of David's persona and his integrity. And we do see the height of him spiritually, but then in his personal decisions, we start to see a little bit of the hubris, a little bit of the big head begin to appear that will eventually lead to his downfall. And that's going to happen a little bit. So let's get oriented here. Where are we in the story? So last we saw David, he had just defeated Goliath. You said, well, that's a pretty good high point. Okay, at least for David, not so much for Goliath, I guess. But, no? Okay. Tough crowd today. That victory did not deliver him into comfort, though. In fact, it delivered him into danger. If you remember that story, the king of Israel, Saul, said, whoever defeats this man, this is just out of a storybook. And by the way, if you read this story in Samuel, you're going to be like, hello, isn't this from like Rapunzel? Isn't this from this is from all these like Brothers Grimm stories. Samuel stole all this from, no, okay. You have to get the timeline right, folks, okay? 1 Samuel was written way before the Brothers Grimm, okay? So all the fairy tales that you have read and seen in Disney, they stole all that from the Bible, okay? So when you read a lot of these stories, you're like, this sounds so familiar. Okay, just remember what came first, okay? But yes, it's really actually really interesting when you read, it's like, oh man, he sounds just like a fairy tale. Well, no, it's the other way around. Okay. He said, whoever defeats the Goliath will get to marry my daughter and live in the palace, and it'd be the richest man in all of Israel, yada, yada. Okay, Does that happen? Not exactly. Okay? Be careful what you wish for. David was living in the court and helping Saul, but Saul was he was a madman. He had an evil spirit given him by the Lord because he had disobeyed direct commands from the Lord and was no longer the rightful king. Remember, David had already been anointed the rightful king of Israel by Samuel and was the chosen one that should be on the throne, but Saul was still in control. And so Saul has now kind of gone crazy. A lot of sociologists and psychologists have looked at this story and think that Saul was suffering from what is called manic depressive disorder or bipolar depression, I think is what it's called, or something like that. Having these manic episodes where he would go crazy, and he tried to kill David. Tried to twice. It's kind of hard to read the story chronologically sometimes. You'll notice that in Samuel that it's like, didn't this already happen once where Saul tries to throw a spear at David in court, and it happens twice, or maybe it happened once but it's recounted in different times. That's because of the way that this book was put together by the different editors. So different source material is put together into one book. So sometimes it's chronologically, it's like, wait, what? How is this going? Did it already happen? Or wait, David's at court, and then now he's out in the field, and then he's back at court. So it is kind of difficult sometimes to read. There's some great commentaries of 1 Samuel that are available for free, like at BibleGateway.com or Blue Letter Bible has some good ones. So there's some good commentaries that kind of make sense of it and have a good timeline of these things. But it is kind of difficult when you're reading for the first time to keep your place, and it's like, wait, I already read this, or am I going crazy? No, you're not going crazy. But the point is that Saul hates David. Why? Because he's jealous. He's jealous because David is the man. Okay, first he defeats Goliath in front of everybody. And Saul couldn't do it. Saul's the biggest, baddest man in Israel, and he couldn't even face Goliath, much less kill him. And David does. And then soon after that, David gets 1,000 men under his command, and he just goes about laying waste to the enemies of Israel. And the people start singing about it, and they have this little ditty, this little folk song about David. They say, Saul killed his thousands, but David kills his tens of thousands. And Saul can't stand it. He says, what are they talking about, this man from Bethlehem, Jesse's son, and they're not singing praises of me. I'm the king. It's just shepherd boy. He gets insanely jealous. So he tries to kill him in court, in the throne room. What a scandal. Can you imagine that on Fox News or CNN? This breaking news, the king tries to kill a man in the White House. It's like, whoa, okay. Well, maybe you could, actually. I don't know these days. Nothing would surprise me these days. My wife, she said the other day, this is the funniest thing. We're getting ready for bed. She goes, hey, did you hear about the meteor? And I was like, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, that's exactly the kind of thing I expect. Did you hear about the meteor? It's like, oh, well, how much time do we got left? You know, it's like right, that's the perfect sentence for 20.
To be fair, it was back to back, Ohio and then Texas, like in Houston.
Yeah, that's like the perfect statement for 2026. Did you hear about the meteor? It's like, well, did you hear about the volcano? Did you hear about the tidal wave? You know, like, what's that? Okay. Did you hear about the king trying to kill that kid in the throne room? Yeah, okay. All right, so he's driven from the court. And he's on the run. He's a fugitive of the law, the national hero on the run. And he seeks refuge. It's a soap opera, guys. If you want to be excited, it's a lot of twists and turns and subterfuge and espionage. He flees and he goes to the priests. The priests of the Most High Lord, the Most High God. He seeks shelter, sanctuary, okay? Again, have you seen Hunchback of Notre Dame Sanctuary? It's very similar to this. He goes there, and Saul shows up. And he says, and David has just left. And the priests are like, well, we don't know where he is. It's like, well, you know, maybe he was here, maybe he wasn't. And Saul says, I know he was here. I have an informant. he has an informant, and he knows for sure, and so he slaughters all the priests, their wives, their children, everyone. Okay, and he orders he doesn't do it. He orders his men to do it. And at first his men say no. It's like, this is an abomination before the Lord. We can't do it. And he goes, well, you better do it or I'm going to kill you. And so then they do it. It's horrible. Only one survives, a remnant. Okay, which is a very typical thing in the Old Testament, where one survives to tell the tale, to hold on to the. In other words, the people of God are never fully destroyed. There's always like one to keep, or a small portion to keep the faith alive. So then David goes to the Philistines, the enemy, the arch nemesis. He goes to the king and he has to pretend to be mad. He's drooling in the mouth. He's talking gibberish. And the Philistine is like, wait, isn't this David, the one who's been destroying us in the battlefield? And now here he is, driven mad. No wonder Saul kicked him out. Okay, it's like, I'm just going to keep him around as a pet, to say, like, look, here was the one that was destroying us, and now he's been driven mad, and we'll just keep him as a court jester for a little while, but he survives. Then he escapes from there, and then he starts to lead kind of a revolt, except they're not really revolting. They're just kind of surviving, and he gets this band of. It really is just like a movie. It's really awesome. He gets this band of misfits. They're distressed, they're in debt, they're disconnected, they're fugitives, they have nowhere else to go, man, and they just show up with David and they're living in caves. It's really like an action film where he starts to, get these robbers and pirates together, they're just hanging out in the cave, It's like, I can just see it like an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie back in the day or something, or Johnny Depp or something. But the bad news is they're being hunted by Saul, and 3,000 hand-picked soldiers from Israel are chasing them across the wilderness. And he's more of an outcast than ever. Even though remember, he is the rightful king of Israel. He really is. He is the rightful king. But he's not really, he's running, he's on the run. He is not leading a rebellion. He is just trying to survive. But he doesn't break spiritually. He never blames God for anything. He never takes it personally. He's just like, well, I'm on the run. This is not great, but God will provide. He writes some beautiful psalms here. Let's look at Psalm 57. At Miktam of David, when he fled from Saul in the cave, he ends up in a cave, a literal cave, hiding with his men. And he writes a psalm from there. Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me. For in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge till the storms of my destruction pass. My heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and make melody. He is in a cave, folks, when he's writing this, with 400 distressed, smelly men, okay, on the run, being chased by 3,000 hardened veteran soldiers and a mad king bent on his destruction. And he is celebrating, praising God. He says, I'm not in control here. The Lord is in control. And he has brought me to this place for his reasons, not mine. Is it great? No, but I'm going to hold steadfast, and I will sing and make melody for it, because this is the hour and the place that God has chosen for me. I am his servant. Yes, please.
So by this time, Samuel has already declared, publicly, David is the king.
No.
The people, they don't know anything about David. They just think he's like a great war hero, and that's it.
That's right.
Okay.
He is a great war hero.
Okay.
And I should mention this about Jonathan. Okay, so Jonathan is Saul's son and David's closest friend and ally. And Jonathan this whole time has been trying to talk his dad down off the ledge, and has been saying David has done nothing wrong. And they've had some very public arguments about it, where Saul has almost tried to kill his own son over it, where Jonathan had to leave because it was going to get violent. And they've had public arguments about David, saying like, why are you trying to kill me? He has done nothing wrong. It will be a blood guilt upon your head, Dad, if you do this. And yet you continue to go after him. And so, but he's the king. In fact, when they were at Nob and they were killing the priests, the men refused to do it because they're like, well, what are we doing here? Like, we're chasing after this guy, like this fugitive, and everyone knows, like, you didn't really do anything wrong. We were all there. When you tried to kill him with those spears, there was no reason behind it. He didn't talk back. He wasn't trying to kill you. You just got upset because they were singing a song about him. And he came back from a great victory. Oh, yeah, it was because Saul tried to trick him. You know how he was promised the hand of his daughter, right? But that was just all a lie. He didn't, obviously you're not going to give the hand of your daughter and the heir to your kingdom to a shepherd from Bethlehem. That's ridiculous, right? No one's going to do that. So he gave the hand of his eldest daughter to someone else. But then one of his lesser daughters really liked David because he was hanging out in court playing music and stuff. So he's like, okay, I'll marry her off. But you're going to have to go kill 1,000 Philistines and bring back proof that you've done it. So go ahead, good luck with that, kid. And David was like, oh, that's it? Okay, I can do that. That's easy work for me. So he goes and he does it, and he comes back and he's like, oh my God, I can't believe he did it. So I guess I do have to let this kid marry this girl. So he does that, and then they start singing about that, and then that's when he goes crazy and tries to kill him. So, but basically the whole kingdom knows that this is a wild goose chase. And Saul starts to lose a lot of support throughout this whole process. Mainly because he's not ruling. This has become his sole focus. It's become like his great white whale, you might say. And he's not governing the kingdom. He's taking valuable resources, which we'll see here. Okay, so that's a great question. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, is he running away? I mean, he killed 10,000 Philistines. Okay.
Yeah.
Is he running away from Saul out of fear, or is he running away because God is telling him not yet? Like, don't attack Saul directly. You have to use everything else except for your own hand to make Saul leave the throne. Like, I'm just a little confused. Like,
Great.
Why didn't he attack him in the spirit and say, "Hey, God smite him now"? Like, I don't.
Great
understand.
question. Okay,
Yeah.
we're about to and that's coming up right now.
Okay.
So yes, he is afraid
Okay.
of dying. Okay. David loves God. David, like most human beings, wants to live. Okay. He is very courageous and will go to battle when called, but is not going to just stand there and get pinned to the wall with a spear. Okay, so he is a human being, and he's a fighter. So he's not a murderer yet. Okay, but he's not going to just say like, oh well, he's the king, and so if he wants me to die, I'm just gonna lay down and die. Okay, so he's gonna survive, right? Does that make sense?
Is anointed, like he knows he's supposed to be the next king at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So why not take it, I guess, and say, hey, I'm anointed.
So at this point, Samuel's still alive, and Samuel has not given him the green light. Okay, now Samuel does die at some point here. I think we're gonna get to it in a little bit. Samuel does die, but even then, David's waiting upon the Lord. David's waiting upon the Lord. So let's look at En-Gedi, because I think this will answer your question here a little bit, or at least start to answer the question. 1 Samuel 24. Saul. Okay, so David's hiding in this cave with his men at the back of the cave. Remember, so in the highlands, in these mountains, there's all these caves everywhere in these sandstone caves, right? And they're hard to see. And it's hot, right? So they're hiding in these caves. If you've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? That's where these same caves, these cave systems. So the men are hiding up there, and then they hear something, right? And it's like, what? Like, shh, shh, shh. And in comes Saul himself. He's coming, they're chasing, they know they're around here somewhere. They come in, Saul comes in to relieve himself, to come in, take a break, use the restroom, get out of the heat, right? And just, it says relieve himself, but it's not, it's just to relieve, to take a break, basically, is what it is. And to nap. And David is there with his men. And they're like, okay, he's here. He's following, like, and they're not too scared because he comes in by himself, like away from his men, you know? And they're like, I can't believe it. Like, this is like, what a gift. So they come in, it's like, here's the day with the Lord. He said, I will give the enemy into your hand. That's what the men say to David. They say like this, because that's what's been promised to David, is that don't worry about it. You will be king. I've anointed you for a purpose. And it wasn't to embarrass my own name. It's to make you king. And I will give the enemy into your hand. And now the men are like, oh, well, this is obviously it. let's take care of business. And David says, no, this is not it. Not in a dark cave, not through subterfuge, not like this. This is not the way God works. So what does he do? He creeps forward and he cuts off the corner of Saul's kingly robe. And he says this, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. The promise that was given to David, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand. David was not promised that he was going to kill Saul, because Saul was anointed. He is the Lord's anointed, chosen by God to lead Israel. That means that David cannot put a hand on him, ever. And the vengeance is going to be the Lord's, as we'll see in this story later. It is not for David to take care of it. It is the Lord's business. And David has to do his own thing, basically. David has to survive. But it's the Lord's judgment that Saul will have to deal with, not David. Does that make sense? And so David's like, I can't touch this guy. He's the Lord's anointed. And so he's off limits, no matter what. He's just off limits. So he cuts off the robe. Cutting the corner of the king's garment was itself a symbolic act of aggression to claim power. A lot of times, and we see this in the Old Testament, that when Saul went to go to, what was that kingdom he was supposed to demolish? Moab? No. We just talked about it a few weeks ago. I can't remember. Negeb, something like that. Help me out, y'all. We're not paying attention? It's when he lost the Holy Spirit, and he basically lost his kingdom. He was supposed to go and completely destroy this kingdom, but instead he took some of the choice animals and he spared the king, right? Why? Is to bring him back and to parade him without his robe. They would march him like naked through the streets and stuff, disrobed, because the robe it wasn't a crown, it was a robe, a kingly robe that they would wear to display their power. And so they would disrobe them and make them, walk through the streets naked. That was what.
Was this Nineveh?
No. I can't, Negev or something, Zipporah or something like that. I don't know. All the names kind of they get muddled in my head. Sorry. But so he cuts his robe. Then Saul wakes up. He goes outside, and then as they're leaving, David comes out and he goes, "Hey, Saul, did you forget something?" I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit, but he says, "Hello, your king. I think you forgot something. Here's part of your robe." And Saul looks down. Sure enough, his robe is missing, and he realizes that David was there the whole time. And he even bows to him. He's very respectful in this confrontation. What is it? Gat? Oh, yeah. Yeah, Amalek. That's right. The Amalekites. The Amalekites. That's it. Okay, yeah. Our good friends, the Amalekites. Okay. No, they weren't good friends. They betrayed the Hebrews as they were walking through the wilderness. That's why they got destroyed. Okay, but anyway, it's all coming back to me now. Anyway, so they have this conversation. What's that?
Saul coming back to me? That was funny. Good one, David.
Yeah, leave the jokes to me, please. I'm professional. Okay. That was actually really good. Okay. So they had this conversation, and he says, "May the Lord be gracious unto you. I just want you to know I could have killed you, but I didn't. Because I am not the judge. May the Lord judge between you and I." But he is going to, and he's basically giving Saul a warning. He's like, "Hey, look, you're going to keep chasing me? The Lord is going to judge between us, but it's not going to be me. I could have, and I didn't." And he said, "My hand shall not be the judge." And Saul, I guess he's having like a good day. He says, "Is this your voice, my son David?" He goes, "Yes, Lord, it is me." Remember, they used to be pretty close. David would soothe him with his music and make him feel better, but then Saul just couldn't take the jealousy. And Saul, he lifts up his voice, he weeps, and he says, "Okay, truce, it's over. I'm going back home. I can't do this anymore. I've invested. I've come to my senses." Yeah, that doesn't last very long. Okay. He goes back, and then he says, "No, I can't stand it. I got to kill this kid. There's no way I can let a shepherd boy upstage me and make me look bad." And so he goes back out against him. Now, in the meantime, so David again is chased, this time with more men, because Saul says, "I'm not going to be embarrassed again. I'm going to end this once and for all." David is being chased, but Saul gets sleepy and is in a camp. And David and Saul's nephew actually infiltrate the camp. And Saul and his entire camp are overcome in a deep sleep that the Lord sends on them. So it's a supernatural sleep. And Abishai, David's nephew, not Saul's nephew, my bad, stand over Saul with a spear. Now Saul's asleep. And Saul's own spear is stuck in the ground next to his head, and his own personal water bucket or water dish is there. And David and David's nephew are there. And his nephew says, "God has given your enemy into your hand again." He goes, "Let me do it, David. You are king." It's like, "I understand. We've already been over this. You cannot put your hand on him, but I can. And now I'm here. Last time you were there by yourself. Now I'm here. Let me take this sword and drive a stake through him." And very reminiscent of, what's that story with the girl that puts a tent peg to that guy's head? It's very similar to that, right? I can never remember her name, but the prostitute. But she's one of Jesus's ancestors, actually. But he's like, "Let me just pin him to the ground, and then we're done. You can't do it. You can't touch the Lord's anointed, but I can." But David says, "Absolutely not. Do not destroy him, for who can put on his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" Now, this really is interesting when you think about the Lord's anointed. What's that? Jael.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about this word anointed, I want to make sure that you know what we're talking about here, because what does the word Christ mean? Do you know what the word Christ really means? It means anointed. That's what it means. Messiah, anointed, the anointed one. That's what the word Christ means, anointed. So when David talks a lot about the anointed one and being anointed, all of this language throughout 1 Samuel, and when we read 1 and 2 Samuel, and we're talking about David and the king of Israel and David's lineage, it's, I think, really valuable that we look at it through what we call a Christological lens. And what I mean by that is that we look at it as Christians on this side of Easter. And we look at because now obviously David is not saying all these things with the idea of Christ in his mind, okay? He's not saying the Lord, who the Lord's anointed and will be guiltless. And what I mean by that is, 1,500 years from now, there will be this man named Jesus of Nazareth, and they will call him Christ, the King, the Anointed One, and he will be guiltless, but yet he will die on the cross for your sins. Okay, I don't mean that. That's not what David is saying here, okay? But we can look at it through this lens and say, like, wow, he's talking about, so what I mean by that, say, do not destroy him. For who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day he will die, and he will go down in battle and perish. Now, when he says, who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless, okay? Well, it's interesting because the guiltless anointed one, the Christ, they did put out their hands against him. And he was struck down. And he was pinned. Right? So he was pinned. But he was guiltless. And the ones who did pin him were guilty. And yet the guiltless anointed one was pinned, but for our transgressions, for the guiltless anointed one. So I'm just saying it's really interesting when we look at it from that perspective. This whole scenario is a lot more interesting as opposed to just what's happening between Saul and David, okay? And then the whole thing is much more interesting, I think, when you look at it from that perspective about the anointing of Saul and the anointing of David. But that's just my perspective. So when you read this, which I hope you do, I hope you read 1 Samuel because it's a very interesting story. Hopefully, and I think that I would just say this in general with Pathfinders, is I hope that you listen to what I have to say and it piques your interest and gives you a little bit of a background for when you go home and you read 1 Samuel on your own, and then you and you're actually reading the story and you kind of have a little bit of background. Because what I say really doesn't hold a candle to the actual scripture, okay? So now, what is David saying? His theology, okay? David's theology is precise. Saul's death belongs to God because he's the anointed one, first. Secondly, vengeance belongs to the Lord. And the throne will come through God's timing, not David's ambition. We'll get there when we get there, basically. And seizing the promise is not the same as receiving it. And that's true. Seizing something is not the same as receiving something. David will not reach for what God has promised. He will wait for it. All right. Now, in between these two these two accounts of David showing restraint, which I think are some of his best moments, there is one not so great moment. And when I read this story, I've heard this story many times before. It's about with this woman named Abigail. And she's often talked about in like women's studies because to be quite frank, there aren't a lot of women in the Old Testament that have a lot of fleshed out stories. And there are many reasons for that we're not going to go into today because we don't want to get it hijacked, but we can talk about some other time, okay? But Abigail has she has like a whole chapter basically where she's a big part of this story. And so in women's Bible studies, she's talked about a lot. And quite frankly, for good reason. She does a really good thing in this chapter 25 here. But because of that, I think that in this chapter 25, we often hear preaching or teaching about chapter 25 from Abigail's perspective and not from David's perspective. And so I think that sometimes David gets kind of overlooked in this part, in this chapter 25. But what I find when we're looking at it from his perspective, and we kind of, and I don't mean this in a bad way at all, we kind of ignore Abigail for a minute, just kind of put her on the back burner. We just look at it just purely from a David lens. I think we find something kind of troubling. So there's this guy named Nabal. And Nabal, which literally means fool, okay? That's what his name means, is fool. And I don't know what his mom was thinking, but who names their kid fool? I don't know. Like, maybe it just stuck. Maybe that's his nickname, or I don't know. They couldn't think of anything, and that's a hard one, though. That's how do you live that one down? But he's a shepherd, and in this area, and David and his men have been guarding his flocks. I guess these kind of, again, the chronology is really kind of hard. It doesn't really give a whole lot of context here. It just kind of comes out of nowhere, this story. It's in between these two things. Like, they're like running around and being chased for, their lives and barely escaping. And then all of a sudden, David wants to go to this big party. And it's like, wait, what? I guess he had time for that. So must not have been that bad. I don't know. But there are times when Saul has to leave to go take care. Like, there's this one time where Saul's chasing David, and they come to him with urgent news saying, hey, the Philistines are attacking our right flank. So he has to pull all his men to go do that. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's during that time. I don't know. It's not real clear. But David shows up, or David doesn't show up. Nabal it's during, I guess, the spring. And Nabal and his workers are shearing all the flock. And they're having this big shearing thing, and they're culling the herd, and they're roasting. They're having a big giant party, right? Because they're culling the herd, and they're roasting a bunch of the sheep that didn't make the cut. And they're having a big party. And so David says, okay, he sends some of his men, he sends 10 men with a respectful request saying, hey, we've been providing protection. Can you send us some of the meat and the fleeces to feed the men? And Nabal, who is a fool, just like the Bible says, and he's a fool just like his name says. Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shears and give it to men who come, who I don't know where? So David is making a pretty respectful request and a pretty reasonable request. And Nabal says, no, I don't think so. Thanks, but no thanks. So when the men get back, he says, all right, let's strap on your swords, and we're going to go kill this guy and take everything. That's what he says. He says, okay, I tried to be nice, and that didn't work, so put on your sword, and we're taking everything instead of just a little bit. Which is really weird. He just really flies off the handle. He goes from 0 to 60, like immediately. Which is really interesting, because twice we see David showing amazing restraint against a man who has actively tried to kill him on several different occasions. A man he has every right to defend himself against and kill. Then there's this other guy who just basically said, I don't want to give you some mutton. And not only is he going to kill that man, he's going to kill all of his servants as well, who had basically nothing to do with it. They're just doing a job, paid laborers. And now he's going to go massacre all of them. So we have utmost respect for a king, somebody, but we have zero respect for a nobody. It's like, well, who is Nabal? He's like, he disrespected me. So David, I think we start to see the hubris of David. And he will respect a king because, well, who is he? He's a king. Now, he doesn't sit on the throne yet. But he obviously doesn't view himself as that shepherd. And what is Nabal, by the way? He's a shepherd. Now, he may be a very wealthy and pretty good shepherd. He has a huge flock, and he's done well for himself, but he's still a shepherd. Okay? Saul's a king. So does David identify him with himself more as the king now or the shepherd boy? I think that shepherd boy identity is long gone. And now he sees himself as a peer of Saul. And he says, well, there's a gentleman's agreement here. I was like, he's a king. I'm a king. He's, we kind of like there's some respect, mutual respect there. I'm anointed. I don't put my hand on the Lord's anointed because like, I'm the Lord's anointed. And I wouldn't want that to, but this guy's just how dare this peasant talk to his future king like that? Let's go kill him.
But David's still pretty young at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, he is.
Are we thinking like he's in his 30s at this point?
Maybe late 20s, 30s. I mean, that's a hard thing about the Bible. It doesn't really give us too much indication of his age at any time, except towards the very end. Yeah, it's very frustrating. Like even when he's killing Goliath.
26-year-old or stable 37-year-old.
Yeah, I don't think stable is ever really in the description of David. Like even when he's an old man, he's not. He's kind of weird the whole time. He is not stable. Charismatic, yes. Stable. Solomon maybe, but not even Solomon. I don't know. He's eccentric. But yeah, so the entitlement is starting to begin. Fortunately, Abigail comes along. She hears about it. And now, we put her on the back burner for a little bit. Let's put her in the front here, okay? She is grace personified. Thank goodness for Abigail, okay? She hears about it. She's like, oh no, what did Nabal do again? She's married to this fool, unfortunately. And I guess she knows kind of what this guy's big mouth does sometimes. And she says, oh no, he's done it again. So she gets this big spread of raisins and dates and mutton and bread. And she intercepts David on the way to his rampage. And she says, the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because the Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel. My Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs or of conscience or having shed without cause. This is it's kind of a difficult little speech that she gives, because she uses the word Lord a lot. But there's two different Lords. There's one that is either Yahweh or Adonai, which is like God. And there's this Lord, which is like my Lord, like a prince, kind of. And so if you read it, the capital, all caps Lord is Yahweh or Adonai. And then I'm not sure, I didn't look it up. I didn't look into translation to Hebrew. Sometimes it's Yahweh and sometimes it's Adonai. And then the other Lord is, what's the other one? Can't remember the other word in Hebrew for Lord, but it's like prince or king. But she uses them interchangeably, so it's kind of hard to read if you're not reading it with the capital word. But anyway, she says, and David said, okay, well, blessed be your discretion, blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand. And so he takes a breath and he's like, whoa, wow, if it weren't for this woman talking me down and cooling my head, I would have made a huge mistake. He realizes it. He says it right there, blood guilt, sin. I would have been guilty of murder, which is blood guilt, guilty of murder, and from working salvation with my own hand. In other words, taking matters into my own hands, which he has twice. Well, he did. This is in between the two times where he spares Saul. He does that on his own with Saul, but here we see him getting the hot head and taking matters into his own hand, but Abigail saves the day. The difference is Saul was a king who could destroy him. Nabal was just a fool who just merely insulted him. Interesting, David could absorb the threat of death more easily than the sting of disrespect. Makes you wonder, right? Sometimes it takes more courage to be humble than it does to look death in the eye. The death of self is harder sometimes than the death of our body, I think. And I mean, at least for me. Okay? The death of ego. Now, let's talk about the Psalms. Remember, David is the author of many Psalms. Not quite a third of them, but close. Psalm 57 that we talked about, the one in the cave. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge till the storms of destruction pass by. Wow, that's really good. Likely from the wilderness in Judah, as 63 says, my soul thirsts for you, my flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. Even in the wilderness, when he is completely isolated and alone, he knows that the only way out is with God. The only way out. He may not know how to do it or when it's going to come, but he knows the only way that he's going to get out of this predicament is with God's help. Psalm 34, after he pretends to be mad, I sought the Lord and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. So the pattern is extremely consistent. Honest cries of distress. That's one thing about David is that he's a pretty honest guy. With a couple notable exceptions. I mean, he does pretend to go crazy once. He's sly. I guess I should say that. He is pretty sly sometimes, but he's pretty honest about his emotions, especially with God. He's very open with God. And he really trusts in God's character. He's a man after God's own heart. He understands the character and nature of God very, very well, and trusts in it. And he's always moving towards praise. He's a musician at heart, right? He really understands the nature of worship and praise extremely well. In fact, one thing that he did, and we'll talk about this probably later, is, David, and I'll go into more detail, but, he didn't build the temple, right? His son Solomon did, but he laid out all the plans for it and how it was going to be built, and he gathered all the materials. One thing that he did do that carried into the temple that Solomon followed was ordering the worship and ordering the way the priesthood was set up. And so when the temple opened, the priesthood was ready to start managing it and running it. So David did all of that. And one thing that he did was set up the orchestra and the choir and the band and all the worship committee, basically. It was a prime, very, very important thing for him that he set up worship in the temple before he passed it on to somebody else. He wasn't allowed to build it. He wasn't allowed to go into it, but God did let him set up the worship that was going to happen in the temple. even though he never got to experience it himself. So he was really, really into worship and praise, David was. And we see that. Even in
because of a sin of his, like Moses couldn't go into the promised land?
yes, because he shed too much blood.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the reason given. He shed too much blood with his own hands. And that's really kind of ironic because that's the reason he's being chased here. Because of the killing of the tens of thousands. And then God says, I'm sorry. I cannot have a man that shed this much blood be the one to build my temple. Yeah. All right.
It's like, where's the forgiveness in that portion, Like, okay, you're allowed to do this much, but you can't do this part. It's because Christ hasn't come yet, obviously.
Well,
but
I don't know if it's about, I don't know if forgiveness is the right, I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like, because there's grace, because he did let him, like I said, he let him set up the worship. He let him so his fingerprints are still on it. You know what I mean? Like he still gets to contribute. But there's still a line drawn. And I think that's like for Moses, you bring up a good point, like Moses still gets to see the promised land. He still gets to see his work completed. The people are there. They made it. But the line is still drawn for everyone because, it's like God has to say to the people, you cannot take it into your own hands, to Moses, It's like they have to know where the authority comes from. It comes from God, it doesn't come from Moses. There has to be a line drawn somewhere. God cannot just be permissible, right? But he can let him go and see. He's like, hey, Moses, thank you. You did the right thing. You got him here. But I have to draw the line. David, you can set up worship. You can see your fingerprints. You can see that the temple's going to be built by your son. But I can't let you build it. You were just too zealous. You just killed too many people. Sometimes you did it for me, but killing the 10,000 Philistines and bringing their foreskins back as a prize to win a woman's hand in marriage, I don't see that. That's not exactly God's plan. Sometimes he went and defended Israel, and sometimes he went and killed 10,000 people and brought back a trophy just to marry a girl that he liked. So, you know what I'm saying? It's like, so God has to draw the line. It's like, yeah, you were a great warrior. You killed Goliath to defend the name of God. And sometimes you just murdered people and called it defending Israel. So I'm going to have to draw the line. You can't build the Holy of Holies. So I think there is some sort of, and God is just, but he is merciful, but he's also just. And so you can't have one without the other. So, okay. Well, I think that's about all for today. Next week, the final confrontation between the two anointed ones of Israel. And we'll close out Saul. Saul does not meet a good end. I wish I could say I don't leave you too much of a cliffhanger. Spoiler alert. Saul didn't make it, folks. Okay? Saul does not.